Everyone in the church fell silent. The bride stood frozen, her veil trembling slightly in her hands. Her heart raced, her breath shallow beneath the lace covering her face. She was meant to walk forward, take his hand, and start the rest of her life. But instead, she stood still, locked in place, her eyes wide and glassy. Her groom, Mark, waited at the altar with a nervous smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shifted slightly, unsure if this hesitation was part of some emotional moment, or if something was truly wrong. The officiant glanced between them awkwardly. The guest's family, friends, co-workers, even old neighbors filled the pews, dressed in their finest, leaning forward with expectant smiles. Yet you could feel it in the air, something was off. Then, softly but clearly, the bride whispered, I can't do this." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Her father, who had walked her down the aisle moments before, stiffened beside her, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. The maid of honor's bouquet dipped as her arm fell limp with shock. Murmurs began. A few people leaned in, trying to catch what had just happened. The organist's fingers hovered over the keys, frozen mid-song. Rachel, the bride, slowly stepped backward, her hands trembling. The weight of hundreds of eyes on her didn't stop her. She turned around, lifted the edge of her dress, and walked back down the aisle in complete silence. Not another word, just the steady sound of her heels tapping against the tiled floor. Outside, a light breeze stirred her veil. The sky was overcast, heavy with spring clouds, but it didn't rain. She stood alone on the church steps, not crying, not screaming, just breathing. People always imagine that a runaway bride would be hysterical, but Rachel was calm. Shaken, yes, but there was a strange peace in her decision. She had trusted herself in that moment more than she had ever trusted anyone. No one knew what had happened, not even her closest friends, not her father, not the man she was supposed to marry. What no one saw was what had led to that moment, the quiet unraveling that had started a week earlier. It had come in the form of a simple letter, no return address, no signature, just a short handwritten note slipped under her apartment door. The writing was neat, the tone measured, not emotional, not threatening. It read, "You don't know the man you're about to marry. He's not who he says he is. He's hidden things. Please, before you say I do, look closer." Rachel had stared at it for hours. She read it over and over, searching for clues. She thought about throwing it away, but she didn't. Something about it unsettled her, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Whoever wrote it wasn't trying to hurt her. They were trying to warn her. That much she could feel. She had asked Mark casually at first about his past, about an old job he never talked about people he used to know. He deflected. He got defensive. He said things like, "Why are you digging up the past?" or "You know me now, that's what matters." And he always smiled after he said it, that smile. It used to comfort her. Now it made her stomach twist. She told no one about the letter. She didn't want drama. She didn't want anyone trying to convince her of what to do. She needed to figure it out herself. But the more she looked, the more she noticed cracks, small lies, gaps in stories. His past was a blank wall, and every time she knocked, it echoed. That's when she began to feel the weight of the wedding itself, the dress fittings, the seating chart, the expensive venue, the guests flying in. It had all built a momentum of its own, and she felt like she was being carried along, not walking willingly. But nothing prepared her for what happened next. As she stood outside that church, heart still pounding from her decision, a dusty old sedan pulled up beside the curb. The engine rattled as it shut off, and the door creaked open. Out stepped a man who looked completely out of place at a wedding, elderly, thin, wearing a weathered gray coat and holding a cracked leather bag. His shoes were scuffed, his hands were rough and calloused. But his eyes were kind. He walked slowly but directly toward Rachel. "You don't know me," he said gently, "but I knew your mother." Rachel blinked at the man standing before her. The crowd behind her, still buzzing in confusion and curiosity, seemed to fade away as she took in the stranger's presence. His voice was soft but steady, not intrusive, not demanding, just honest. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thin from the storm of emotion. "You knew my mother?" "Yes," he nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "A long time ago. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She helped me during one of the worst seasons of my life." Rachel tilted her head, still trying to make sense of who this man was and why he had come here now, at this moment of all days. His grey coat was frayed at the sleeves, his shoes looked worn past the point of comfort. But there was a dignity about him, something unspoken, something that made her keep listening. "My name is Samuel," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. "I was homeless for years, lived on the streets, shelters, wherever I could find a place to rest. Your mother used to volunteer at the shelter on Jefferson Street. She would bring warm food, thick blankets in winter, but more than anything she brought kindness. She always asked people their names, looked them in the eyes, like we mattered, like we were human." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. She remembered her mother's quiet acts of compassion, the way she gave without needing recognition. This man wasn't telling her anything she didn't believe, but hearing it now, hearing it here asterisk. It felt almost unreal. Samuel continued. "Back then, she talked about you all the time, said you were strong, said you had a mind of your own, and that you'd grow up to help people. She said, even if I'm not around forever, I know my daughter will carry on the good." Rachel's breath hitched slightly, and she pressed her lips together, the tears now stinging her eyes. When she passed, Samuel said softly, "I made her a promise. I told her I'd watch from afar, not interfere, just look out for you if I could." She stepped back slightly, eyes scanning his face, trying to read the truth in his words. There was no performance in his tone, no angle, just a sincerity that pierced through the chaos of everything else. "I never thought I'd come forward," he said, "but when I heard you were marrying Mark, I couldn't stay silent." Rachel's eyes widened. The name hit her like a cold wind. "I knew him," Samuel went on. "Years ago. He wasn't called Mark then. He worked for a corporation that handled city development, big contracts, big profits. The company bought out properties and evicted people like me. The shelter where your mother volunteered was one of them. I watched them bulldoze it to the ground. No warning, just gone." He paused. His voice didn't waver, but there was something raw behind it. "Mark was part of the team that made it happen. He wasn't just doing a job, he was proud of it. I remember his face. I remembered his laugh when people begged for help. That kind of cruelty. It stays with you. And when I saw his picture online, next to yours, I wrote the letter." Rachel didn't say anything. She couldn't. The world felt like it had tilted sideways. Part of her wanted to deny it, to rationalize, to pretend it was a case of mistaken identity or exaggeration. But deep down, she knew. The letter, the missing pieces, the vague responses Mark gave, it all made sense now. Samuel looked down at the bag in his hand, then back up. "I didn't come to ruin your day. I came because I knew your mother would have." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Old, yellowed with time. Rachel took it carefully, unfolding it. Inside was a photo, her mother smiling, arm around a much younger Samuel, both of them standing in front of a table of donated food. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, it read, "People are never a burden. They are a blessing in disguise." Rachel's hand trembled as she held the photo. The past, the present, everything collided in that moment. The truth was no longer something distant or abstract. It was standing in front of her in worn shoes, with gentle eyes and a promise fulfilled. Inside the church, guests remained glued to their seats, whispering and speculating. Mark stood near the altar, his expression blank, confused at first, then gradually shifting to annoyance. He kept glancing toward the entrance, hoping Rachel would return, that this was just cold feet or a temporary breakdown. But the longer she stayed away, the more cracks began to show on his face. He pulled out his phone, tapped it once, then put it back quickly, trying to mask the rising panic behind a forced smile. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, but no one spoke. Suddenly, the heavy church doors creaked open again. The heads of guests turned in unison. There she was, Rachel, walking slowly, deliberately, back into the aisle, but she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Samuel. The contrast between them was jarring. Rachel in a flowing white gown, veil pulled back, face pale but resolute. Samuel in his worn grey coat, out of place among polished shoes and satin dresses. He walked beside her silently, neither leading nor following, just there. Her hand rested gently on his arm. The murmuring intensified. Confusion rippled through the room like a wave. Some people leaned to whisper. Others simply watched, frozen. Mark's mouth parted slightly. His brows furrowed, his eyes narrowing as Samuel came into view. Rachel and Samuel reached the front of the church. She turned to face the room, looking out at the faces that had come to celebrate a union, a day that was supposed to be full of joy and certainty. Her voice rang out, not loud, but clear enough to silence the crowd. "I know what you're all thinking." She began, her gaze steady. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But something more important than happiness stopped me." Mark stepped forward, starting to speak, but Rachel held up a hand. "I need you to listen first," she said, "because I didn't walk away on a whim. I walked away because I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see." She looked over at Samuel briefly, then back at the crowd. "Mark and I built our relationship on the version of himself he showed to me, successful, charming, driven. But behind that smile was a past I didn't know, a past that came knocking when someone who knew my mother appeared and helped me see the truth." Gasps echoed around the room. Mark stiffened, his mask began to falter, but he didn't interrupt again. "This man," Rachel gestured to Samuel, "was homeless. My mother helped him during that time, and in return he watched over me from a distance as a promise to her after she passed." She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "He knew Mark before any of us did, before the new name, before the suits and the money, back when he was part of something that destroyed a shelter, the same one my mother worked at, the same one Samuel lived in." Mark's jaw clenched. People were now staring at him, waiting for some kind of explanation, but he offered none. He was part of the team that ordered the eviction. She continued. "Not just doing his job, but coldly, proudly, without compassion. People were thrown into the streets overnight, and when Samuel recognized him, he came forward, not for vengeance, not to ruin anything, but to protect me." Rachel turned her gaze fully on Mark now, her voice unwavering. "You told me the past didn't matter, but the past is what shapes who we are. You said people like Samuel were just collateral damage. I remember those words. I let them slide. I didn't want to see it then." She inhaled deeply. "But now I do. I see what I almost stepped into, a life where truth is buried for comfort, where appearances are everything, where empathy is optional." She turned to face the audience again. "This wasn't just about love. It was about who I'm becoming and who I choose to stand with." She looked at Samuel and gave a small nod. He remained still, silent as ever, but something warm flickered in his eyes. The church was silent again, not in confusion this time, but in awe. The transformation in Rachel was undeniable. She wasn't the unsure bride anymore. She had walked in as a woman about to enter someone else's version of love. She stood now as someone who had reclaimed her own.